This podcast does not provide medical nor legal advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast where we talk about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement. I'm Marianne Matzo, a nurse practitioner, and I use my experience from working as a nurse for 45 years to help answer your questions about what happens at the end of life.
Hello! I think yours was better. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I'm Charlie Navarrete, an actor in New York City, asking, do you have a DNR? Do not resuscitate order? Where is it? The more you know, the better prepared you or a loved one will be to make difficult decisions.
So please relax and get yourself something to eat and drink. And thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie and me as we talk about fatigue. In the first half, Charlie has a drag queen story hour, and I have our recipe of the week. And in the second and third half, we will explore fatigue associated with chronic illness with an interview with Stevan Lemke. You know, Charlie, there are people who prefer brownies for dessert and those who like chocolate chip cookies for dessert.
Yeah.
Our recipe this week offers a new take on combining these treats into one.
Oh?
Brownie cookies.
Brownie cookies.
Yeah. These are made in a muffin pan so that there are plenty of crispy edges for everyone to have at their next funeral lunch. So, Charlie, we in the drag queen community, you know, you and I, both of us,
What the hell are you talking about? All right, yeah, go on.
Have had some, you know, deaths of some really quite old drag queens. And so, as we occasionally do, we have a couple of obituaries, yes?
Yes, we do. Walter Cole was born in 1930 in Portland, Oregon. His mother died when he was 9, and his father, an alcoholic, became abusive to him. He was bullied and called a sissy in school. He married in 1951 and had 2 children and served in the Army for 3 years. Upon his return to Portland, he had numerous retail jobs and small businesses until he purchased a Demas Tavern in 1967. The tavern was renamed Darcelle's, and XV, Roman numerals for 15, was added in 1974 after Darcelle was crowned the 15th Empress of Portland's Imperial Sovereign Rose Court, one of the nation's oldest nonprofit LGBT organizations. Darcelle the 15th was the oldest performing drag queen in the world, according to Guinness World Records, and Darcelle the 15th Showplace is the longest continually running drag show on the West Coast. In November of 2022, Darcelle's 92nd birthday was celebrated with a classic cabaret-style drag show complete with a full cast opening and closing number, sharp and sometimes bawdy jokes, in the venue's trademark style by host Poison Waters. And at the end of the stage sat Darcelle, who at her busiest has put on 15 shows per week between the spot's 4 walls and who was still at it on her 92nd birthday, performing The Rose and What'll I Do, that she sang live in her low, gravelly voice. She died the following March, 2023. Barry, I know.
Rest in peace, Darcelle.
Yes. Barry Humphries, better known as Dame Edna, died at age 89 in April 2023. She was described in her New York Times obituary as a stiletto-heeled, stiletto-tongued persona who might well have been the spawn of a menage a quatre involving Oscar Wilde, Salvador Dali, Auntie Mame, and Miss Piggy.
That's perfect.
And that's in the Times, ladies and gentlemen. So, Dame Edna was not so much a character as a cultural phenomena, a force of nature trafficking in wicked, sequent commentary on the nature of fame. The Australian-born actor and comic had been performing for 70 years, mostly in shows written by Mr. Humphries. Dame Edna was a separate entity from Mr. Humphreys, even to Mr. Humphreys. The moment he put on the rhinestone glasses, Mr. Humphreys often said Dame Edna became real to him too, an entirely separate law unto herself. And she did likewise. My manager, she disdainfully called him. She also called Mr. Humphreys a money-grubbing little slug and accused him of embezzling her fortune. He did, it must be said, cash her checks. Mr. Humphreys frequently pointed out that he was neither a female impersonator in the conventional sense, nor a cross-dresser in any sense. Dame Edna's live shows were primarily confessional. There was commentary on her husband and children. I made a decision. I put my family last. Her beauty regimen, good self-esteem, is very important. I look in the mirror and say, Edna, you are gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. And the constellation of luminaries who routinely sought her counsel, among them Queen Elizabeth II and her family. I've had to change my telephone number several times to stop them ringing me. Dame Edna's husband, Norm, a chronic invalid whose prostate, she often lamented, has been hanging over me for years, died long ago. Her survivors include an adored son, Kenny, who designed all her gowns, a less adored son, Bruce, and a despised daughter, the wayward Valmai. She steals things, puts them in her pantyhose, particularly frozen chickens when she's in a supermarket. Another daughter, Lois, was abducted as an infant by a rogue koala, a subject Dame Edna could bring herself to discuss with interviews only rarely. Though the child was never seen again, to the end of her life, Dame Edna never gave up hope she would be found. She told NPR in 2015, I'm looking. Every time I pass a eucalyptus tree, I look up. Rest in peace, ladies.
Oh my God. I saw a clip where Dame Edna went into Prince Charles's
Oh my God, I was just going to
or something. And the look on his face.
And you remember? So next to Camilla, so she sits down. Actually, there might have been a couple of different times, but the one I remember, she sits down. I mean, and obviously neither Camilla nor Charles knew she was coming. They look at her, start to giggle, and then she turns to them and says, "Oh, wait a minute. I have better seats," and gets out and walks outside. I mean, the whole thing lasted maybe 20 seconds. It was, but the two of them just lost it. It was just, yeah, very, very funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he had, I think I remember Mr. Humphreys had a couple wives, right?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he had his own comedy tour things that he would do that weren't Dame Edna, too. He had his own career.
Yes, there's another character he played called Les Patterson. I don't know how to describe this character, but think Boris Johnson with comedy. I mean, just intentionally being an oaf and just saying ridiculous things with it, a politician without filters. There we are, a politician without a filter. That was his other character.
I can think of some politicians who have no filters. So.
Yeah, but those guys have no idea that they think they're being serious, but they're not. Yeah, exactly. Very, very funny. And really, you would not recognize Barry Humphreys to Dame Edna to Les Patterson and think this is all the same person. not at all. Just very, boy, you want to talk about the method acting, just spot on, just very direct with each individual, each character, and then, Humphreys himself.
Well, I remember seeing an interview with Humphreys, and he was saying that, Dame Edna would say things, and he would say to himself, "Now there's a good line. I wish I thought of that."
Yes, exactly, and that's the thing I was talking about. Yes, where it's like suddenly, and he had said many times he does not know where this character came from, but there it was, and just like took over. He could be in that character and just. That's it. It was just like
imagine being possessed by Dame Edna.
Yeah. So if you, though they're not quite sure what the hell we're talking about, please Google Dame Edna and look at some of those clips. Absolutely hysterical. Very, very funny.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And please also go to our webpage for the recipe for brownie cookies and additional resources for this program. Many of you have contacted Everyone Died to say thanks to Marianne and how her 45 plus years of knowledge have helped you to navigate the path to death. So we ask for your support in the form of a tax-deductible contribution so that we can continue to offer you quality programming. Thank you in advance for going to our website to make your donation, as well as following us on Facebook and Instagram. Visit us at www.everyonedies.org. That's Every, the number 1, dies.org. Marianne?
Thanks. We've done many interviews with Steve Lemke. Those of you who've been listening know that, and this is the final interview that we have. Steve Lemke was diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, and he had a double lung transplant 5 years prior to this interview. Steven spent a lot of his time helping other people learn about and cope with IPF. He's very open about talking about IPF, and in this interview, he talks about the fatigue following a lung transplant. Steven died at age 69 on March 26th of 2022, and this is our final interview with him.
Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Stevan Lemke. You've probably heard some of his other interviews with me before. I tend to, find people that I really like, and I just keep interviewing them until they tell me to go away. And Stevan has not yet told me to go away.
No, I haven't.
Thank you for that. So if you remember, Stevan was diagnosed with IPF and had a double lung transplant 5 years ago. And so we've been interviewing him, learning about, first about IPF, and then about how to get a lung transplant, and then about getting the lung transplant, and then about how to recover from lung transplant. But today we're going to leave his lungs alone for a little while and talk about fatigue. So welcome, Stevan.
Well, it's so good to be here today.
I appreciate that. So, fatigue is, I jokingly said to Stevan, you must know something about fatigue, because there's really all of the symptoms that can come with chronic illness. Fatigue is a pretty universal one, and it can be associated with having surgery for any reason, be associated with having kids. It can be associated with depression. It can be associated with low blood counts. It can be associated with anything. So I'd asked Stevan if he had figured out any ways to help manage his fatigue, and he said that he had. So first off, tell us about fatigue from your point of view, and then just talk to us a little while about how you've learned to manage it. And I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. I'll be back in like 30 minutes. Is that okay?
What's that?
I said I'm going to go get a cup of coffee, and I'll be back in about 30 minutes.
Oh, okay. Would you grab one for me also?
Sure.
Because I just woke up from a nap. That's part of my fatigue. So I guess if, the way I look at it is prior to becoming ill, I was a go-getter all my life. I worked. If I needed to work 10 hours a day or 7 days a week, I was always there. And then when I got home, I always found something to work on. I'd be painting something or building something or going with the family somewhere. And I just accepted that as my way of life because that's the way I'd always been. Mm-hmm. And when I got sick, started feeling sick, just the easiest thing, like a vacuuming a living room or something like that, I would think, oh my, I wonder what's going on. I need to sit down. And that got to be like washing the dishes would be, I would let the dishes soak while I took a nap, and then I would wake up and rinse them off and put them in the dishwasher and go sit down for a while. And that drained me. Just doing regular routine little things like that. Making a bed is just completely out of the question. Something about lifting your arms out in front of you is just way too much. Mm-hmm. Even though for 5 years before my transplant, and I was ill, I stopped doing the flooring, which I had done all my life, and went and delivered pizzas. And when I first started noticing there, when I had to go upstairs to deliver to an apartment house, it was the strangest thing. I didn't put it together until it happened quite a few times, but when I'd get halfway up a big staircase, I'd have to pee. Mm-hmm. And so then I noticed that only time I got that feeling when I was going up staircases, because it happened to be like 15 times. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, this is weird. This is all before I was had gone to the doctor at all. And so then I started noticing that I was taking naps in the middle of the day, which I had never done. And the feeling isn't like, oh, I'm tired. I should have slept longer last night, or I should have went to bed earlier. It isn't that kind of feeling. It's a kind of feeling like you could fall asleep standing up. Mm-hmm. And it was scary sometimes towards the end before I was diagnosed. I was scaring myself to even drive.
Oh, yes. That can be very scary.
Because I would catch
the oxygen up to the brain, and you can just literally just go right to sleep.
Right. I mean, just going across town. I'm not talking about a long extended trip, where, you're getting dazzled by the road or something. Just driving across town, I would be so tired, I'd have to roll the window down, stick my head out the window. And when I got to where I'm going, I would think, my God, how did I get here? Wow. I remember even calling my daughter one night and say, I'm going to come home. I'm across town, but if I'm not there in about 30 minutes, would you, call me or something? Because I don't remember how I got here, and it's pretty scary.
Wow.
And so, I mean, the lack of oxygen does a lot of damage that you don't even realize at the time. Mm-hmm. I had noticed also that I would always get some kind of a rash, like around on my face, like around my chin.
Mm-hmm. What was that?
And I went to the doctor. They didn't find anything wrong. I asked, pharmacists, and every time I make a doctor's appointment, of course, that day wouldn't happen. Huh. And after a few months of that happening once a month, it started happening like once a week. and then it became a permanent thing. And by that time I was diagnosed, I was on oxygen, and after I was on the high doses of oxygen, that rash went away.
Huh.
And so it's, I don't know, has something to do with the lack of oxygen, just like when my fingernails became clubbed and purple and my lips were blue. That's the same thing, I think. It just happened to be on my face also.
That's really interesting.
I worked hard all my life. I was always working with my hands, lifting, getting up and down, pounding, and I ached. My hands, my wrists, my elbows, my shoulders, my neck, my back, every joint just ached all the time. And my hands especially, I mean, they just were... I went to the doctors about that, and they said, well, you don't have arthritis. You're just wore out from working hard all your life. You know, your joints are just like a tool. You keep working it. Then eventually they're going to wear down. And so I was.
But you were young. It's not like you had. I mean, you were only in your 50s during this.
Yeah,
right?
I was in my 50s. Yes, yeah. And so I just took aspirin and sucked it up. And when I started on the oxygen, I noticed that got much better.
Mm-hmm.
And after
right. Well,
I had
we need to have. I mean, because associated with your disease, you had low oxygen levels. But I would guess that with your new lungs, your oxygen levels are pretty normal.
Oh, my oxygen levels, ever since the very first day after the transplant that I was awake until today, have been phenomenal. It's always 98, 99%. And but you're still fatigued. So what are you doing now to manage that fatigue? Well, my doctor told me, he said, the best thing you can do is just sleep when you want to sleep, get up when you want to get up. He says, if you're a night owl, stay up, sleep during the day, whatever you have to do, whatever you feel like doing. And so what I have done myself is I will sleep for 2-3 hours about 3 times in a 24-hour period.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be the best thing that suits me. If I try to sleep 7 or 8 hours at once and then stay up the rest of the day, that is very, very difficult for me to do because I get fatigued if I do any kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I was even to, sweep the floor, do the laundry, do the dishes, I would, even if I slept 8 hours, I would still have to lay down and take a nap after doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So the fatigue seems chronic to me.
Well, because for those who haven't listened to our other shows, the disease is chronic. The lung transplant doesn't cure the disease, or a transplant doesn't necessarily cure a disease, or cancer treatment doesn't cure the disease. It can stop it, it can slow it, it can put it into remission, and you can get back a lot of your function, but I don't know that people get back 100%. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I don't. In my case, I've had days, I've had even sometimes a couple weeks at a time where I feel like, yes, okay, finally, I'm back 100%, but it never lasts.
Mm.
And then as time goes on here now for the last, I'm going to say 2 years, it's been slowing down more and more and more. I'm more fatigued more often than I was a year ago. And a year ago, I was more than I was 2 years ago. It just seems to be like it's, hopefully I hit a level here pretty soon where it doesn't continue. But, I do notice greatly the fatigue taking a trend. And like as you said, that this is not a cure. The first few months of my transplant were fantastic. And then I did some pulmonary testing for a regular scheduled appointment, and it was quite low compared to what it had been. So they did a bronchoscopy and found out that I have not in the lungs, but there's a flap where the lungs are connected, to your diaphragm, that opens and shuts when you breathe, like a valve. And I can breathe in as deep as I want, just like a young kid. My lungs are wonderful. But that flap doesn't stay open when I breathe out. So I can't breathe out everything I bring in. And so that causes me some difficulties. And they said the only way they can fix that would be to put a stent in there. But they said in their experience, putting a stent in there doesn't always last. Sometimes it falls out. And then you have more trouble than just having the flap not opening. So they went ahead while it was under, and they, I think they blew it up like 3 sizes with a balloon to open it up. And oh my gosh, I thought I was king. So give me that breath test now, man. I'll blow the bottom out of that thing, And but it only lasted about 6 weeks. So that was one time when for about 6 weeks I was like, okay, this is what it's like to have a transplant. This is what it should feel like. But then it's gone downhill again. And so now it's time to, when I go back to the doctor in February, to see if there's anything that they can do or if this is going to be my new normal, because I had that done right after transplant, so about 4 years ago. And now it's pretty bad. And I don't know if that's one of the reasons why I'm getting so fatigued, but anyway, it's all related to the transplant.
Right. Which, if there's the irony, right? Without the transplant, you would have died. With the transplant, it's like you're hoping for perfection, but it's not perfection.
Oh, no, it's not. Of course, I mean, it's wonderful to be alive. I've gotten 5 years so far of extra life. And, but I hear people, I belong to a couple different groups, lung transplant groups, and a couple of them online. And people are always asking questions. When does this stop? Is this normal? How come this hurts? And I just want to tell them, but I don't want to discourage them, that, you know what? This is not a cure. You're going to have side effects. There's a lot of stuff that you just have to deal with. You have to accept that you're alive and you're breathing.
Right.
And
I think also part of the myth that people have is that, they're going to be feeling like they felt before they got sick, not taking into consideration that 5, 6, or 10 years have gone by. And in that period, even without the disease, you would be aging and things would be changing anyway. I find that often with my patients. It's like they don't take into account the normal aging process that has occurred along with the progression of their disease.
That is an excellent point, because I think I really take that into consideration. I pay a lot of attention to my whole system, my whole health, and before I ever mention it to a doctor or think that, is this something that, can be fixed, or is this something that is really serious? I analyze it, and I live with it, and I think about it, and, I try to determine on my own, is this just something I need to live with? And most of the time it is. I mean, this thing about the flap not opening, I don't think that's normal aging, but
no.
It's possible. No. It could have been just fine with my old lungs if I wouldn't have been diseased. Maybe they would have all aged at the same rate. But having new healthy lungs and an old flap, it's...
Yeah. So do you do any exercise, Stevan?
I walk is about all. I have some little dumbbells here that I use. I do yoga once in a while, which I should do. I should do every day, but it's just more fatigue, and then this COVID, I think, kind of adds to the fatigue, because being quarantined and you don't have the stimulation of company, and so, but that's only a small part of it, though.
Well, but one of the symptoms of, and I'm not implying that you have depression, but for our listeners, one of the symptoms of depression is that feeling of fatigue. So I think that you raised a good point when you're talking about, COVID and either our response to how people are responding to it, or our response to people dying, or our response to not being able to travel or see people or do whatever it is that may have brought us pleasure before. So being aware that depression itself, one of the symptoms of depression itself is fatigue. So there's a lot goes into our feeling so exhausted. It can be emotional as well as physical.
Yes, it can. I have to tell you something that it made me so happy. I'm not boasting, but I can't tell people because they think I am. But the last time I met, once or twice a year, when I go to Mayo Clinic, I have to meet with my psychiatrist also. And the last time I met with her last summer, not this summer, but the summer before, she smiled at me and she said, "You know what?" She says, "You are doing fantastic." She said, "If all my clients were like you, I wouldn't have any clients." And this was, like one of the top psychiatrists at the, well-known Mayo Clinic. So, I mean, to me, that was like, wow, you're doing really good, dude. And she has always kind of let me adjust my antidepressant medications that I've been on since I was diagnosed. And I was put on them when I was diagnosed because when you can't breathe, you panic. And then when you find out you have a deadly disease there's no cure for, you panic. So I was put on medication then. And so since after a couple of years, after the transplant, she told me, she said, "How do you feel? Maybe you could take a little bit more of that or take less of it or whatever." And for the last few years, she's been trying to weed me down to nothing. And I actually was down to nothing just when COVID hit. And so then I started on my own again because I've been doing this again for so long that I'm so aware of myself I can adjust it to how I evaluate myself. And I started out with a half a pill. for a couple months. And then I went back up to a whole pill. And about 2-3 weeks ago, I started taking an additional one because I know I'm getting depressed.
Mm-hmm. And do you notice your fatigue getting worse when you do get depressed?
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of factors that go into being fatigued.
Yeah. And one of the, with all the research that we know about fatigue, one of the variables in all of the studies that show to help is exercise. And we're not talking about, running around the block or, doing anything for long periods of time. But 20 minutes of walking every single day has been shown to decrease people's fatigue. And you don't even have to do 20 minutes all at once. You can do 10 minutes twice a day. So, you're walking Cyrus, and I'm sure that he has to go out at least twice a day.
It
helps you in terms of you getting your physical activity. And I've had patients say to me, I don't really want to exercise. Do you have a pill? It's like, well, we have pills for certain things, but you kind of have to do the first part first, and I promise you will feel better if you go out and walk. And some people Steven, are just really, really resistant to getting up out of the chair. Nope, I'm too tired. But, you got to start.
Right. Because I've also seen the opposite. I talk to people, and either they're on some kind of medication and they don't want to admit it, or, they'll say, if I tell them, I've been on this since I was diagnosed, and they'll say, well, I'm on some also, but it's just a very, very, very little teeny bit. They always want to downplay it, When I want to say, well, a little teeny, teeny, teeny bit isn't going to do you any good.
Well, it might for some people. I mean, you can't. It depends on the drug, and it depends on a lot of things. But I think what you're really kind of bringing to light here is that there is a stigma attached to managing your depression, and that for any of us to admit and say, oh yeah, I'm depressed, would be like, oh my gosh, we can't say that. When in fact, in terms of diagnosis, medical diagnosis related to our mental health, depression, they call it the common cold of mental health, meaning that everybody gets it at some point or another. It's very common. And, it's kind of a consequence of life, at least in our American culture. I don't know really the statistics in other places, but in the American culture, it is very, very prevalent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard. I've had a hard time. Some patients say, I don't like to take pills. And I'd say, well, you didn't want to ever have cancer either, but here we are. And so, given that this is where we are, how about if, we manage this, or I'll have a family member in and I'll, assess about depression, and they'll say, nope, I'm not depressed. And the family member sitting next to them nodding their head. It's like, yes, they are.
Right.
So for those of you who think, well, I don't want to get on medication, get on it for 2 months. Just do it for 2 months, because it takes about 6 weeks for an antidepressant to work. So get on it for 2 months and see how you feel. And the other thing I notice with people is that they don't necessarily notice they feel any different, but that same family member is like, oh my God, thank you for prescribing that. Thank you, because they're so much less irritable and so much less cranky, and, they're getting out and doing more, and they're more willing to go do this or more willing to do that. But the person who's taking it, they don't really, really don't necessarily notice it. until you kind of start asking the questions. Oh, yeah, I do have more energy. Oh, yeah, I do take the dog out more,
I think that, to me, shows that the medication is working if they don't notice the difference.
Right.
Because if you see the sudden, like hitting a switch change, then you're just drugged.
Right. And antidepressants don't work that way. They really take 6 weeks to get into the system and to start kind of making those edges less sharp and making our, making things a little bit easier for ourselves and for the people around us. So,
and they have to be consistent too,
Oh,
they
yeah,
can't
you can't not
off and on.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So in our last couple of minutes, Stevan, do you have any advice or pearls of wisdom for people who are feeling really fatigued from their chronic illness? What would anything you ever really wanted to tell people, you can say it now.
Well, what worked for me, and I know this isn't going to be everybody's cup of tea, I had to change completely my way of thinking about everything. I had to accept my disease, accept that the transplant is not a forever lasting thing, and there's going to be side effects. And in order to do that, in order to accept all of that, I had to learn to live in the minute, not take one day at a time. That didn't work for me. I have to live in the minute, so that you're paying attention to all your surroundings and what you're doing all the time. And if you're doing that, you can, if you feel yourself slipping away somewhere in your mind, you can always bring yourself back and say, well, what was going to hurt me? Why was I feeling that way? So it's sore. It's nothing that's going to kill me. So I'm behind on this bill. They're not going to come and throw me in jail. If you don't let your mind wander to anything, really, because you can make anything to be depressing if that's your frame of mind. Mm-hmm. But if you're focused all the time on what's going on right now in this moment, you realize that you're safe. Nothing's going to hurt you. And why sit around and mope when you can find humor and good things everywhere? If you're going to sit around and listen to the worst newscast shows all day long, you're probably going to get depressed. And
so for people who are feeling that that fatigue, staying in the moment, assess how you feel. If you're feeling fatigued, go take a walk. If you need a rest, take a rest. Be patient with yourself. And if it's chronic illness, it may not go away, and so it may be a part of your life that you're going to have to kind of contend with, through to the end of life. And we everyone has certain issues, but with chronic illness, fatigue is one of those that really we certainly get sick and tired of. So, Stevan, thank you so much for talking with us.
Please stay tuned for the continuing saga of Everyone Dies, and thank you for listening. Sand through an hourglass are like eyeballs in a gumball machine, though less squishier. This is Charlie Navarrete, and from retired actor Michael J. Fox of Family Ties and Back to the Future fame, regarding his Parkinson's disease, you don't die from Parkinson's, you die with it. I'm not going to be 80.
And I'm Marianne Matzo, and we'll see you next week. Remember, every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.